This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, John Rada back again with episode 56 of A Geek Leader, and today I've got Derek Doepker on the show. And Derek is a 7-time best-selling author. He's written books about fitness, nutrition, as well as some of his newer books about how to get stuck, how to get motivated, and willpower. And one of the things I really liked about this conversation that I had with Derek was about, we talked a lot about how to intrinsically motivate yourself to do things that are uncomfortable. And he had this really cool thing about building habits, and it's just a super good episode. And it's one of the things that we need as IT leaders to kind of motivate ourselves to make the changes. Part of this podcast is to tell you what to do and how to make those changes, but also how do we motivate ourselves to do that? So with that being said, give it up for Derek. And we're live. I'm here with Derek Doepker, and Derek is a consultant, and he talks a lot about willpower, and he's a best-selling author, and everything that I just said in the intro coming into this. But I want to turn it over to Derek and let Derek tell you a little bit about himself, because he can do it way better than I can.
Hey, John. Well, thanks for having me on, first of all. And, I'll keep my story relatively brief, give the highlights. And that is, I started out a big passion growing up. I knew I wanted to become a rock star. So I had no intention of getting into business, into writing books, into coaching, leadership, any of those things. And what started my journey down that path was actually when I got into health and fitness. So I got into health and fitness. I got myself into pretty good shape when I went from like eating fast food every single night in high school, literally every single night, just about eating fast food, to suddenly like doing a total 180 with my habits and super into health my senior year of high school. And so the first transformation for me in my habits and understanding willpower and behavior change, which we'll get into, started with my own health. And then the next thing that happened is I had a friend come to me for help. And throughout the next several years, I had more and more people coming to me for guidance and for what I didn't realize at the time was like leadership and coaching. And what I found is that I could give the best tips. I could share exactly what I was doing. And some people, like the friend at the time, he would take it, he adopted it, lost, I don't know, over like 60 pounds or something like that, got in great shape. And other people, they would hear it and they go, that's cool. But you go, it's like it's in one ear and out the other. And it frustrated me so much that people would want help. They say that they wanted to change. They say that they wanted to do something different in their life. And I could tell them what to do. They wouldn't necessarily do it. And at that time, I had a lot more investment in people. I'm like, you need to do this. You need to, like, it's going to be so awesome. And so that got me introduced to this whole world of, psychology and human behavior. Why is it that I was able to change those habits in myself? Why is it that I had some habits, though, that I still struggled with? What is it about eventually making the shift from going, how is it that I can share something with people where they would actually get it instead of it just, again, going through one ear out the other, or like the lead the horse to water but can't make him drink. And so I spent years then during that period of time understanding about influence and, again, psychology, behavior change, and had this shift where I realized that, it actually has a lot to do with me and how I communicate and who I communicate with. And I started to uncover this idea that actually the way that I share a message with people, or whether they're invested in it or not, or qualifying the right people, makes a big difference in whether or not people are going to take the advice. And I mean, that's it in a nutshell. And eventually then I got into writing books, starting with health and fitness, but really always with a mindset aspect. And eventually it was that period of time I got into entrepreneurship, understanding these concepts. And after years of struggle, eventually had a #1 best-selling book in health and fitness. And since then, I've been working, continued with coaching, but now coaching for business owners, coaching when it comes to, again, mindset, willpower, behavior change, leadership, all these things that have the psychological component to it, as well as the business aspect. And of course, we can dive into any of those things, but that's the big picture overview of my backstory.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about those habits. It sounded like you just made a 180 almost immediately to change your habits when it came to health and fitness. And I'm guessing that you could do that with really anything that you're doing. But what was that shift like for you?
I mean, looking back, it did seem like a relatively sudden shift rather than like a very slow thing. And it's interesting because it wasn't like I hit rock bottom. I wasn't in some terrible condition. I wasn't diagnosed with anything. I was like, 17 years old. And up to that point, the reason why it was challenging for me to change is I didn't really have a big reason why to change. I was like, well, I was really scrawny and skinny, which I didn't like, but it wasn't that big of a deal for me. And I thought, well, I can kind of get away with it. It's not going to affect me until I'm 60 or 70 years old. And by that point, I can change my habits before then. So what first shifted, and this is important to understand about our own motivation as well as motivating others, is really the concept that's been talked about a lot is the why. Simon Sinek, start with why. So when I read a book that showed me scientifically on a very tangible level what was happening inside the body whenever I was eating all the sugar and trans fats and things like that, it became real. And I go, wait a second, this is damaging me right now. This is the reason why I don't have energy right now. This is something that's aging me right now. This is something that's causing my skin to break out and having acne issues like now, right? So it became real and it became relevant and timely and urgent. And I go, oh, wait a second, if I wait to change my behavior, the damage is already being done. So that was the first thing. And then what helped that shift happen relatively quickly, and this is the one big key thing before it's kind of a more of a root issue behind any of the other behavior change, where behavior is almost more of a symptom, if you will, of what someone's identity is, someone's self-image is. So what happened is I did this process, and anyone listening, you can do this, projected out 5 years, 10 years, more like 10 years into the future. And I was thinking, who do I want to be? Not just what do I want to do, like who do I want to be as a person? What kind of example do I want to set for others? And for me, that was personally relevant, this idea of being a leader and a role model for other people. And when I imagined that and I looked out in the future, 10 years, I said, I don't want to be someone who's like eating junk food all the time and is out of shape and any of that. I want to be someone who's strong and fit and healthy and vibrant and full of energy. And I have this image that I created of myself, and it's out in the future, and it's like that's what I'm striving for. And when I had that image and I really, like, every part of me wanted that and was congruent with that, then naturally my behavior started to shift to be in alignment with that, because I really believed, and this is another key thing, I really believed that was possible for me. If someone doesn't believe it's possible, then that's another thing that we can get into. But because I believed it was possible and I created that identity of, just a healthy, fit person, my behaviors very quickly started to shift and change towards that, because now all the eating fast food every night and the stuff I was doing before, it's like it just wasn't in alignment with that, and I felt off if I would have kept doing those old habits.
That's good. So when you talk about like really believing, one of the problems that I have is, I, in the back of my mind, I still have this doubt, and I know I'm an IT director. I know that I lead people. I know that I've got multiple teams underneath me, but still in the back of my head, I have this feeling like, someday someone's going to come in with a clipboard and just say, "Hey, the gig's up," and it's going to be over. And that's that imposter syndrome that kind of just goes through my head. What are some ways that we can solidify that belief and that identity to make those habits go forward, and get past this imposter syndrome?
Yeah, and so imposter syndrome is, first of all, it's incredibly common. So I think even recognizing that is helpful. Awareness that a lot of these things that it can feel like, oh, this is like, am I really qualified to do this? I kind of feel like an imposter. It's like when you realize, like, you can look around at some of the most confident people in the world, and it's like they might still be going through that. Right. So it's part of the human condition, and then that helps, I believe, have some sort of, I guess you'd say, compassion with oneself, or some sense of, you know what, I'm not necessarily going to get rid of this part of my brain that doubts and that questions and things like that. So I'll make a note here. Remind me to come back to the inner doubter. Some practical things with that. So besides the awareness of it, I remember going through this, especially when it came to writing books and being an author. It's like, first of all, who's going to listen to me? Secondly, what qualifies me? There's so many other experts. What if people, like all of that sort of stuff. And one thing that really helped me with that is realizing that imposter syndrome is a self-focus. Mm-hmm. The whole time it's me. What are people thinking of me? And it's almost a sign then when some of the fears come up and some of the doubts, it's like the brain is saying you're really focused on yourself right now. And when you shift your focus outward to service and to what you can do for others, what happened for me is I go, okay, maybe I'm not the biggest expert in the world. I don't know. I mean, who would be even in that case? Instead, I go, do I know a little bit more than the people that I'm helping, than the people that I'm leading, than that I'm managing, than that I'm coaching, or that I'm mentoring? Do I know more than they do? Do I know enough to help them take the next few steps? And in that case, the answer is yes. And with that, I go, okay, all I need to know is how to help these people take their next steps. I don't have to be at the top of the mountain. I just got to know how to get them a little further up the mountain. And when the focus shifts outward, I find for virtually almost everyone, and you're not thinking about yourself, you're thinking about how you can show up in service to others. So that's one thing. Another thing that's very practical is I've heard this idea of one hand up, one hand down. So one hand down is, kind of helping pull up and being a leader for other people. The one hand up is having a mentor or coach or someone else that's guiding you. And then at that point, when you always have someone that's mentoring you and guiding you and leading you, so you're being a follower in that case to another leader, and you're being a leader to someone else, that can instill a confidence, because then it's like, I'm not going to have all the answers, but I know I have someone else that I can go to and that you can go to for guidance. And with that's also a humility of knowing then what your boundaries are, where it's this point of being realistic, where you go, okay, I don't need to pretend to have all the answers. It's interesting. The more I find that a person can admit that they don't know it all, they don't have all the answers, it's actually freeing, because you go, here's what I can help with. And you know what? This is beyond my scope. Referring people to others or going in and getting help. And a very practical example, if I'm coaching someone, for instance, I'm doing some consulting, they might have questions that even if I don't know the specific answer to it, I might A, know a principle that will help them, or B, I go draw out, and this is a skill of influence, draw out an answer from them, and I go, you know what, maybe I don't have to have the answer. I can help them to self-discover the answer. Mm-hmm. Or another thing is going, hey, you know what, that's outside my range of expertise. Who do you think can help you with that? And even that's a way to help people. So that's like some nitty-gritty tactical things when it comes to the imposter syndrome. To recap, a lot of it's getting outside of yourself. And coming back to the doubter aspect, we have an inner voice of doubt and what if and what could go wrong, and am I good enough and all this. Again, when there's a certain acceptance and embracing of that, it actually has less power. And I believe, and what I found in a process I do in coaching, is to actually listen to all those doubts. I'm not good enough. What if people think I'm an imposter? What if the person's going to come in and say the gig's up, whatever. Yeah. Listen, actually listen and list out all of those doubts, and then get realistic with it and go, okay, these doubts might actually be here to help me and to serve me. And then separate, is this just a limiting belief? And there's ways to work through that. And or is it also just I need a different strategy? So for instance, as leaders, if a person goes, well, I don't know if I'm really the best leader. Okay, that's fine. Does that motivate you to get more training? Does that motivate you to get more guidance? Because the flip side is we don't want to be so falsely confident that we no longer grow. and have so much pride to think, yeah, I know it all. I got everything all together. That extreme isn't necessarily beneficial either. So we're constantly in this tension, and our brains are designed to have a certain tension between a certain confidence in our ability, but also a certain questioning in our ability that keeps us humble and keeps us growing. So, I mean, there's way more that we could dive into all of that, but the overall point is a certain acceptance of this yin yang type of balance, and finding that path of inward focus, but also outward focus when it's necessary, and a certain acceptance and embracing of the doubts, and turning them into a way to be actually realistic and in a state of constant growth.
That's good. So I guess I never really thought about the fact that imposter syndrome is really just focusing inward too much, honestly, and not focusing on what you are providing. I've talked on the show before about service leadership and being able to serve others, and it sounds like that's kind of what you were talking about walking up the mountain. I think that's a really good analogy of how, as long as you know a few steps ahead of them, you can coach them up those few steps and learn as you go. And I think sometimes if we wait till we get too far up the mountain, we can't help them up because we don't see those steps that are right there. We're so far removed from those steps, we can't help them out.
That's exactly right. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's such a great observation for those who might think that they need a certain level of, like, I got to know so much, I got to be so far developed, and it actually, at some point, it can lose connection with people, because some people go, this person is so far beyond me. If someone's getting mentorship and training from like a multi-billionaire CEO, they might be like, they're so far beyond where I'm at, it might not be as easy to relate to. It's still worth learning from. I'd certainly learn from a multi-billionaire CEO, but there's certain things that someone who's been like, you know what, I was right where you're at, struggling with what you're struggling with right now, like 6 months ago. And I know, and here's just these next few steps for you that, help me break through that. There's something relatable and compelling about that too. So again, it's like stepping back and going, virtually everything can be a double-edged sword. So it can focus on, a person could think about the downside of it, or they could focus on the upside and like, wait, what's the gift actually in being at the level that I'm at?
No, yeah, that's really good. As you were saying that, I was thinking in my head, I probably couldn't learn how to start a business from Jeff Bezos, but I could from like Pat Flynn, because Jeff Bezos is so far above where we're at, when it comes to the billions of dollars. He'd be good if you already had a business and you were taking an IPO or something like that. But yeah, I think that's a really good point about knowing where you're at, and if you do get too far removed, it could step you back. I wanted to hit on a little bit when you talked about this, idea of this inward doubter and how to get past that. Is it good to have those inward doubts?
I don't really say anything's good or bad. The answer is it depends. So if you have them, then you have them, right? So it's like, if I would caution if someone goes, here's a recipe that I found from firsthand experience, led to personal depression for a while. And this was after I had some success in my business. Then I reached a point where I didn't really know what I wanted next. And I was like, even after I had published a successful book, there's still, maybe it was imposter syndrome or something else. Like, well, what difference can I make in the world? And who's really gonna, all these sorts of doubts and stuff. And what I did is I started to beat myself up, because I'm like, well, I've studied personal development. I've studied psychology. I should be happy. I should be grateful. I should have all these answers. I can help others. Why am I going, through these challenges myself? And I kind of beat myself up for really just being human. And I was like, I'm not okay, and that's not okay. And what switched for me was when I started to go, what, I'm not okay, and that's okay. Because maybe the fact that I'm struggling and I don't have clarity and I'm going through this, maybe that's just the perfect opportunity for me to learn what got me into this, why I'm going through this, and how I can get myself out. And when I realized the upside of having those doubts and those, inward, this inward battle I was going through, then I embraced it and saw it as, this is exactly what I need. And this is exactly what's going to help me help others, down the road who are going through this. So the thing is, the brain is going to have doubts. The brain is going to form assumptions. It's going to do all kinds of things. And it takes this ability to kind of step back and dissociate from it and look at it and observe it, very much like a mindfulness practice, and go, oh, isn't that interesting? Oh, I'm having these doubts. That's interesting. Okay, I wonder where that's coming from. And from this place of curiously observing it. And so it's this non-judgment. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just, oh, that's what my brain's doing. That's what my mind is doing. Okay, now what do I want to do with this? How can I use this to empower me, as opposed to going, oh, I'm having these doubts, and now, oh, that's so bad that I'm having these doubts, and now I'm feeling bad about having these doubts, so now I'm feeling bad about feeling bad, now I'm feeling bad about feeling bad about feeling bad. That was like the downward spiral I went through. And to reverse it and to get out of it was going, well, what if this is perfect? So having those doubts, it's not again, it's not good or bad. It's, what are you going to do with it? And if you use them to learn from them, and if you use them to go, what's the source of these things? And there could be deeper, in some cases, therapy or some coaching or different processes to go through. You can uncover a lot from it. And your unconscious mind can kind of bring things up because it's saying, hey, you need to resolve this. You're having these challenges because there's some things to resolve. And in that case, it's a great way to, your mind is giving you something to be aware of. So it can become a bad thing if a person just beats themselves up over it, or they try to ignore it, or they try to, maybe medicate themselves, whether that's with distraction or substances or whatever, to like ease the pain. Or it could be an amazing opportunity for growth if a person has these doubts or these fears or these things that come up and go, oh, this is so interesting. These are some things that I can learn from and use this as an opportunity to really empower myself and grow through this experience.
Yeah, I think exactly what you said. You're basically talking about self-awareness when it comes to being able to see that, oh, wow, I've got this. Now what do I do with it? And I think that's one of the things that's lacking the most in software developers when they become leaders, is that self-awareness. That it's easy to see what your team's doing, but it's really hard to see what you're doing and how people perceive what you're doing when it comes to leadership and management. And I think that's what you're kind of hitting on with that inner doubt is, yeah, it's there, but it's important to recognize it.
Exactly. Yeah. And we have our blind spots. So that's another reason to have outsiders that can see it. Because as you pointed out, we can often see things in other people really clearly. Not so clear to see it in ourselves. However, we do have this internal guidance system, which is often driven by usually pain or so-called negative emotions. So, for instance, practically speaking, anger is great emotion that's sending a signal, hey, some sort of boundary has been crossed. Mm-hmm. That's useful to know, right? How you respond to that anger could be, potentially destructive, or could be constructive. So it's not the emotion itself, it's how you respond to it. And if you start to see these thoughts and these feelings and like, I'm kind of feeling bad about something, I'm not feeling so great about something, cool. So what is this that it can make me aware of, and then what can I do with it?
Yeah, that's really good. I think sometimes we're not seeing that. We're not aware of it. One of the things I heard you talk about that was really interesting to me, that I wrote down that I had to talk about, was this idea of micro habits. And I know on the show we've talked before about how to get into habits and the power of habits, that book. But what is this idea of micro habits that you talk about?
Yeah, so micro habits, and I think BJ Fogg calls it tiny habits. Stephen Geis has a great book called Mini Habits. The concept is essentially setting the bar low, which might sound strange. This is one of the harder things for high achievers out there. So especially, if you're in a leadership position, if you're in a business, chances are, if you're listening to a podcast, right, I can tell you're probably someone who wants to better yourself, who wants to grow, who's the high achiever mentality.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, which is great. Like I said before, double-edged sword, right? So what's the flip side of the coin? Well, one common thing, it's not a universal, but it's fairly common, is to really set big targets and big goals. And the key with a micro habit or a micro commitment is you actually choose something that's so ridiculously small and easy to do that you're guaranteed to be able to do it. So, for instance, I before I even get into that, I'll say my little mantra that helps trigger this. It's a great reminders. It's my 3 magic words, and that's can I just. It's like, can I just ... And there's a couple reasons psychologically why those 3 words work, which you can get into. The micro commitment part is, can I just, and let's say it's exercise, right? So if I'm been sitting around and let's say someone's been sitting there, they've been watching Netflix, binge watching it for the last 3 hours. They're kind of like settled in. They go, okay, can I just get up and go to the gym for, an hour or whatever? That's challenging to do. Like everything in the body and the psychology is like, I just don't really want to move. But if you go, can I just do 30 seconds of exercise?
Everybody can do that, right?
Everybody can do that. And you can even play a little mind game with yourself where it's like, can I just do 30 seconds of exercise and I can go back to doing what I was doing before? Or when I have work to do and I'm like, I'm about to get on Facebook and I don't always remember to do this when I do. This is why having a little mantra helps. I'm like about to get on. I'm like, wait. Okay. Can I just open up a Word document? So as a writer, maybe write a headline for an article or write a few sentences for an article, and then I can start Facebook. But just take a minute or two to do that. And again, you find something that you're guaranteed to be able to say yes to do. Now, doing that in and itself is not where the magic happens. Where the magic happens is, and I'm sure if you're listening to this, you can think of an experience where you've had where you maybe didn't feel like doing something, and exercise is a common one. But once you got started, then you wanted to keep going. Or at least it was a lot easier to keep going. So can I just do 30 seconds of exercise? Great, do 30 seconds of exercise or do 5 push-ups or 10 jumping jacks or whatever. Okay, cool. But before I stop, can I just do another 30 seconds? Or can I just do one more set? Or can I just do a little bit more? And you do this and you just gradually kind of stretch yourself. And the brain never gets freaked out by that going, oh man, this is too much. Instead it goes, okay, yeah, sure. And what happens is eventually the momentum kicks in, and then it becomes easier to keep going than to stop. So once I start exercising, then I feel good that I'm exercising, and now I want to keep going. Or once I start writing this article, I might be like, well, I'm already a couple sentences in, I might as well finish this paragraph. Or, okay, I might as well write a few more things. And I might not complete the whole thing in that go around, but at least I did something. And a few things happen. One is you're prioritizing what's more important, putting it before some other things. You're creating momentum, which will generate motivation. And as we talked about identity, this is a very practical way to shift your identity. So as I mentioned, from your identity stems your behaviors, and it works in reverse too. There's like this 2-way feedback system where shifting your behaviors can actually shift your emotions and your identity. So for someone who I give an example of a carrot a day. Can I just have a person who wants to start eating healthier? Okay, can I just eat 1 carrot a day? Add that to my diet. I can do more, but is that easy enough for virtually anyone to do? Sure. Or pick another vegetable that doesn't take much preparation. Now, what happens is when you create that micro habit, that micro commitment, now all of a sudden you start to witness yourself and you experience yourself actually making positive changes. And you go, I am someone who eats vegetables every day. And if a person didn't do that before, now suddenly they have this new identity as a vegetable eater. Now, if they weren't conscious about their diet before, they are now conscious that I am someone who's conscious about my diet to a degree. And some of these shifts, it's not about the quantity of change. It's just making any sort of change has a positive benefit. And if someone's already doing well with their diet and exercise, well, now you go, I am someone who constantly improves because I'm taking a next step. And of course, you can apply this to your business and yourself, and then we can get into how to use this with others from a management and leadership perspective. But to recap, can I just, and you find things that are so easy to do, you're guaranteed to say yes to doing it, and then you keep asking the question until eventually momentum takes over. And we can go into a couple troubleshooting things with this, but I'll point out it is actually ideal that you want to give yourself an out, meaning, can I just do this? Yes, you do it. Okay, I'm done. I don't feel like doing anymore. That's okay, right? It's not about forcing yourself. It's about gradually motivating yourself and compelling yourself to do these things. And then you start working with your psychology rather than against it.
Yeah, this kind of sounds like checking that
to-do list, checking something off and feeling that dopamine rush and, that excitement that you did something, if it's really small, it just gets the momentum moving. It gets that ball rolling.
Exactly. And that's from the neuroscience perspective. I mean, yeah, it is the dopamine. It is that little win, that success breeds success. And so that's the challenge with having really big goals. If you only feel good after hitting a big goal, that could be a big goal at the end of the day. So you're waiting all day to feel good, or a big goal like a big project, after 3 months or whatever. And the way habits work, so that's a perfect segue into kind of step 3 of a 3-part habit cycle. You have the cue, routine, and reward. And so we were talking about the power of habit from Charles Duhigg. This is where he talks about it. And so step 3 in a habit is there's habit formation. There's got to be some sort of reward. And it's that intrinsic, inherent reward of that little bit of dopamine that you feel whenever you do something. So this is why someone who, I'm going to use exercise again, because even though we're talking about business in a general sense, I find it relevant for many people and relatable. And that is like someone who's like, okay, I'm going to get in great shape for a wedding. And if they only feel good about the exercise that they do because, 3 months down the road, they look good for a wedding, that's not necessarily going to create a habit, even if they're pretty consistent with their exercise, compared to someone who every time they go exercise, they feel really good about themselves. They feel that dopamine rush. They feel that sense of accomplishment. That's laying down the neural pathways of saying, this feels good, keep doing it, keep it up. And a person might not experience that the first time they exercise, but the more they do it and the more they can probably get rid of some of the things that might keep them from feeling good about exercise. So that's another point I'll come back to in a second. The idea being is you want that dopamine. That dopamine is saying this is good, keep doing it. And so, yeah, as you mentioned, many people with a to-do list, you make that check off the checkbox. That can be really powerful. And so I remember talking to an entrepreneur I was coaching, and she was saying, she's kind of like, I know it sounds silly, but like I really feel good when I just make a to-do list with these checkboxes. I'm like, that's not silly. That's human psychology. Many people feel that because you get that. It is that dopamine rush, and it's these simple things, and it's things that you may have even experienced at some point in your life. Now it's about being conscious and doing them with volition and intention, where you go, okay, I know this helps, even if it seems kind of silly or childish. But let's keep doing it to really reinforce it. And another quick point then about how a person might not feel this sense of reward is if they beat themselves up, kind of going back to that idea of and what I said before, and that is like, well, I should have done more. This isn't good enough. I went and I completed this. Worked with talking to a friend, and she wrote a book. And it's like this amazing accomplishment. She was struggling with all these doubts and imposter syndrome and all this sort of stuff. She finally writes this book. And then when she's done with the book, she mentioned kind of like, yeah, but, I know people who've written like 5 books or this or that. So it's like no matter what the accomplishment is, no matter how much a person overcomes, it's kind of like, yeah, but it's still not good enough. Or, yeah, I did this project, but I didn't quite hit my sales target, or yeah, but it's these kind of yeah buts where it's like negating the success. That's what keeps that dopamine from hitting. And so the key thing is you got to actually embrace the success, allow yourself to feel good about what you did. And if that's just 30 seconds of exercise or meditation or reading a book or writing something or having a conversation with an employee that maybe you're a little bit hesitant about it, but you went ahead and did it, whatever it is, these little, quote unquote, little things actually are more powerful because it's the little things done with repetition that create the new neurology. So allowing yourself to go, yes, I did it. And if you got like sometimes adjusting the physiology, I'll do a fist pump, I'll be like, yes, right? And it sounds funny and ridiculous, but actually doing that helps you feel good, helps you retrain yourself to really embrace the success and get that dopamine rush and soak it in whenever you do any of these behaviors that you want to make a habit.
No, I think that's really good. That's one thing that I struggle with is, I guess I'm so motivated to move on to the next thing that so many times that I don't sit back and say, yeah, I did that, I'm proud of myself. It's more like, hey, let's just move to the next thing. Let's move to the next thing. And I found that when I just sit down and think, what are some things that I did today that I'm proud of, and write those things down or think about those things. I usually try to do three things. I feel so much better, and I'm more likely to do those things again, versus when I don't think about them and I just kind of move forward, I'm less likely to go back and do those same habits.
That's exactly it. Again, the challenge of the high achiever in a generalized sense is that it can be that, okay, cool, what's next? Mm-hmm. What's next? Always that next stepping stone, which is it's like inhaling and exhaling. You want to do both. So taking some time to soak in your successes can be useful. Depending on a person's personality type, some people could benefit from it more than others, but that's useful. You don't want to sit there forever either. You do want to go, okay, now what's next? How can I keep growing? How can I do better next time? But just constantly chasing the next thing without actually reinforcing what went well can lead to a person kind of constantly jumping around doing things. And I find that from a practical perspective, some people have done things that worked really well in the past. That's like I have to keep reminding them, like, wait, why are you doing this new sales tactic when you had something else that worked really well in the past? Like, yes, explore new things, but also do what worked before too. Mm-hmm. And it's like, if you don't actually psychologically, neurologically reinforce things that worked well, then it's easy to potentially overlook it or not train your brain to keep up those positive behaviors. So from a leadership perspective, actually, this is why feedback that is both corrective, how to improve, what you can do better next time, how to improve things, that's important. And that is the growth type of feedback. And I used to think to myself, well, I don't really need someone to tell me what worked well, because I just want to know how I can do better. Just tell me what I need to do better, right? I mean, that's sort of tough. Yeah, just I always want to do better. Mm-hmm. But what I realize is it actually is helpful to hear what worked really well, because if I don't hear that, I might not realize how good something I did was, and I might kind of drop it or forget about it or not do as much of it. So from a self-leadership perspective, you want to reinforce what did work well and also be looking at how can I do even better. And then same thing now when you're talking about leading and managing others, which is going, okay, let's make sure to reinforce positive behaviors, just like you reinforce, doing multiple push-ups, takes more than one push-up to reinforce it in your neurology, reinforce what worked well, and also provide that balance with the corrective. How can I improve?
Yeah, I've actually seen some people before. I don't know if they just take book titles and run with it without actually reading the book. But I heard one person, we were actually talking about this, and he changed something that was working really well. I was like, well, why did you change that? And he's like, well, haven't you ever read that book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There? I'm like, yeah, but that's not what the book's about. I mean, it doesn't mean drop everything. It means focus on what worked well versus what didn't work well. So, yeah, I think that's really good.
Yeah, exactly. It's a balance, right? And that's the tricky thing about taking any sort of advice, including what I'm saying. And I do my best to kind of provide this multiple perspective aspect, which is what's really great advice for one person where they're at might not be the best advice for you. Just like we were saying before, where what a person who is in a multi-million or multi-billion-dollar company does to grow might not be the best strategies for a startup. You can learn from it, but they're at a different phase. And so appreciating this holistic perspective, and then again within yourself going, okay, is it really important to kind of drop what was working before in order to innovate? And at times it is. Or is it really important to kind of keep reinforcing what's working well to grow? And I keep going back to exercise because it's not just a personal passion of mine. It's really there's so many metaphors in exercise that apply to business and apply to life, and that you want to keep doing the same exercises enough that your body adapts to it and gets a certain stimulus. But if you do too much of it, eventually you completely adapt and it no longer stimulates new growth. Mm-hmm. If you're constantly changing things up, your body doesn't know how to adapt. But if you're only doing the same thing for a year straight and never changing it at all or never giving in a new stimulus, then it's you might say overly adapted. So it's this constant balancing act.
Yeah. So thinking about that and using exercise as an example, changing things up a little bit. Sometimes it's hard to do. It's hard to move in a different direction and change things up, and that does take willpower, which we kind of briefly hit on at the beginning. And I've heard some studies and some research that say like willpower is like a muscle, and you have to work it out and you have to exercise it. What is your take on that?
Yeah. So as you said, there's some things that it's like a muscle. And it could be potentially depleted like a muscle. It could get fatigued like a muscle.
Exactly.
Then there's another school of thought which seems to indicate that, well, perhaps belief plays a role, which is that if a person believes they have a limited amount of willpower, it becomes self-fulfilling. If a person believes they have unlimited willpower, that can, to a degree, become self-fulfilling, and it actually doesn't diminish to the same extent or at all under the study's conditions, because the person I believe I have unlimited willpower, and that could become self-fulfilling. So my attitude is I'm not going to claim to know, the deepest intricacies of, how the human brain works. I'll let the researchers continue to unravel that. I'll take a step back and look at principles, and I'll say, okay, what would seem to make sense from a practical perspective is adopting beliefs that empower you. So if you have a belief that you have enough willpower, if you have the belief that you can constantly strengthen your willpower, if that belief serves you, then great. And if you don't have that belief, there's ways to create that belief. And maybe we can get into that, or that's something that, someone trained in how to do this can do it. It's something I work on with clients. But I would say then, in addition to that, the idea then of there's real limits, if you want to put it that way, of human physiology, meaning you can deplete neurotransmitters. You can, I've been in an experience, and, I haven't had probably wouldn't have been diagnosed with clinical depression. I don't know about that, but certainly back years ago when I was going through, a bit of a depression, I can tell you, physically, I was just it's hard to get out of bed. Mm-hmm. It was hard to get out of bed. It was just I don't feel like doing anything. If you take mice and you, deplete their dopamine, you take out all their dopamine, they won't even eat, right? Yeah. So there's real conditions here, if you want to, I'm saying real, there's tangible things going on inside the human body and the human nervous system and the brain that can affect a person's motivation and willpower. So it would stand to reason that it is possible that things can get depleted, and certainly a person's health habits, which is, again, I'm so big on health for business, people in business and entrepreneurs, because it affects these things. So it's kind of yes, your mental beliefs will affect your physical body, and your physical body will affect your psychology. So work with both. That's my practical answer. Adopt the beliefs that most serve you, and also be practical and go, you know what, if I'm really challenging myself and stressing myself out, and I come home at the end of the day and I'm feeling super stressed out and I feel like it's really hard to give myself the willpower to do things, take a look at that and go, what kind of habits can I create that's going to give my body enough stress that I adapt, but not so much that it overdoes it and depletes me.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you kind of went through this depression time in your life where you had good success and you kind of didn't know what you wanted to do and which direction you wanted to go. And I think we all hit something similar to that at different times in our lives. And how is it that you were able to kind of figure this out and get past that and get back to where understanding that it's not okay that you weren't okay, and how did you become okay?
Yeah. So the first big shift happened, I remember, and there's some things that lead up to it. So sometimes people focus just on the breakthrough moment without realizing that there's probably some lead up to that. So leading up to it, I started reading more books and started taking as an opportunity to kind of go, okay, how do I get through this type of thing? So being open to growth and learning health. I remember a turnaround point where someone reached out to me for coaching, and it was kind of this moment where a little bit of that self-pity that I was in was kind of oh man, I can help others, but I can't seem to help myself. and even a little bit of that imposter syndrome. Like, what if they knew? What if they knew I'm struggling? Like, I absolutely knew I could help this person.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, am I a hypocrite? Because I really like the idea of, like, I want to be a role model. And if I haven't done it or succeeded in this area, who am I to help others? And I still carry a lot of that sense with me. What I realized was, I go, in that moment, I very shortly after had a shift where I go, wait a second. If I love helping others, if I love helping others through their challenges, then maybe it's like, quote unquote, right or quote unquote good that I'm going through this, because as I mentioned before, I'm going to figure out what got me into this, why I'm going through this, and how to get out. That's just going to give me the tools and the empathy and the understanding for others who are going through that. And that shift in how I frame that situation and my attitude about it, from going, this is a bad thing that I'm going through this, to what if this is the perfect thing for me to go through, that helped. That was like the first moment of shift, and that shifted the attitude, so it was a mindset shift. And then from there, it became a lot easier to sort of pull myself out, because now everything became a lesson. Everything became an opportunity for growth. Everything became an opportunity, even going back full circle towards the start of this podcast, was it's not just about me. That's self-focus. And there's research even showing that those in depression, if I can remember it correctly, they actually analyze the language of those who are depressed. And there's a lot of I language, a lot of I, a lot of me type of things. And it's a very self-focused condition. And so when I shifted from myself to what am I going through to use this to empower and to serve others and to guide others, all of a sudden I took like kind of this inward focus off myself. And again, to some degree, an inward focus is fine, but it wasn't, the dominating thing. I was able to switch back and forth between, okay, focus on myself for a little bit, but then shift it back out to how what I'm going through will serve others. And I would just say, as you talked about servant leadership, even though I knew about that at the time, even though I valued service at the time, I still got caught into it. And so this is one of those things why I think I don't know if anyone's beyond potentially falling into some of those mental traps. It's not enough to just mentally know it and to even practice it. It's this constant, you might almost say, I don't know if battle's the best word, kind of sounds destructive, but in some ways it could be considered a constant battle, lifelong, in terms of the inner ego and the different things that come up inside of ourselves, and learning to live with that and learning to use it to serve oneself.
Yeah, I like to say that it's a process, not a project. It's not something that you finish. It's just a continuous process.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's really good. And so as we're closing this out, I just want to see if you had any tips or any other thing that you wanted to add for these upcoming leaders that listen to the show.
Sure thing. So I'll kind of close the aspect of the habit thing. So I mentioned that the three parts: the cue, the routine, the reward. So the routine is the habit itself, the behavior. The reward is that internal dopamine rush. You can add in some physiology and some words, and that yes, right, or even just taking a moment to yourself to acknowledge the success. And I think you have a great habit that you mentioned, where you can reflect back and go, okay, so what did I do well? What worked well? What am I happy with about myself? And then after that, going, okay, so what could I do even better tomorrow or going forward, next project or whatever it is. So that's the behavior, that's the reinforcing reward. Then coming back to the first part is the cue or the trigger. And you can have the easiest habit that you want to create. What I found for myself, if I just forget about it, especially when you're doing something new, that can be what takes some people off. So what are the triggers for yourself? How are you going to remind yourself? Do you need to put a note in your phone? Do you need to put something on your calendar? As simple as scheduling it. These things are going to sound common sense, and yet it takes some conscious effort to do it if you're creating new habits and behaviors. So what are you going to do to remind yourself to do these things? And I create sometimes like mantras, like I said, like, can I just? That's a little tool in my tool belt that I can remember those three words and like pull it up on demand as I want. So you can create little sayings or whatever it is that's going to help you remember to do these new things, including asking people, asking your team, asking your employees, asking your family, asking your friends to like, hey, remind me of this. Or if I'm starting to do this thing that I said I was going to not do, we didn't cover too much breaking habits, but the simple thing is have them interrupt it and be like, whoa, wait a second. I thought you said you were going to start doing, whatever. It's like, oh yeah. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, I think accountability is really important. That's one of the reasons I started this podcast, was to have accountability, to say, I said it publicly, so I've got to do it.
Exactly. And so that's a great segue then into the next thing I would say. So to close the loop on that. Yeah. So create a reminder for yourself, pick things that are easy enough that you can start doing it and create some rewards. And a mindset here, we're talking a lot about self-leadership, self-management, which is really where it starts. Mm-hmm. As you learn these principles, we're talking about human psychology. So there are individual differences, and that's a topic for a different podcast about what motivates one person isn't necessarily what motivates someone else. However, like things like these micro commitments are great to use with your team. Then you can use the can I just with your team and the people that you're leading in your family and things like that, where if it works on you, it can work to help influence and inspire others. And then like you said, accountability. I would say the final kind of tip or takeaway is you talk one hand up, one hand down. So who's the hand up? And it can be multiple people that help you stay on track, that can teach you these things, that can remind you of these things. And one of the things I do when I'm coaching people, a lot of times what they find is most helpful is I'm just reminding them. And that's oftentimes more valuable than giving them a bunch of new things to do. If anything, that's just overwhelming. Having someone that can teach you a principle and then keep you on track with it until it becomes habit is really powerful. And if anyone wants to reach out to me for coaching, that's something that I offer. I also can provide recommendations if I'm not a good fit. So I can share the links for that. I don't know if we'll do that in the show notes or whatever.
Yeah, I'll put that in the show notes. I'll include your Twitter or anywhere else you want me to link where people can get in touch with you. We'll include all that. Also, I'll put some links to some of your books. We've had some pretty good bestseller books out there that we'll include. And fitness is important to me too, being a slow runner. I like to run long distances, but just do it at a slow pace, like the marathons and stuff. So, we'll include that, all your links in there as well. But I really appreciate having you on. I think it's been a great show, and hopefully all the audience will reach out to you and book some of that coaching.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John.